Gar kein Druck, ne? Ja, hallo, vielen Dank, dass ihr... Oh shit, I had to do it in English. Okay, I'm very honored that so many of you have come here this early, even though it was raining until just now, but it's going to be a sunny weekend, and I hope you get something out of this talk and that you will not be bored and be happy that you got up this early today. Okay, I am Mareen Fischinger in German and Mareen Fischinger in English, and I'm a photographer living and working here in Cologne with the help of a bunch of freelancers of all trades, like makeup artists and hairstylists and clothing and assistants like Nathan. Hello. And we work together on commercial photo productions when we produce photographs for advertising or fill brand libraries for B2B or B2C communication. Am I too fast talking? Okay. So our studio consists of several people that don't work at the place, but we always go to clients and to photo sets that we find. And the people I work with, they are all constantly growing, as is the studio, and sometimes they're even growing up and out of their positions. So within the last 15 years or so, I've worked with very many different ones. If you've read my short bio, you might have noticed that I also do a little bit of acting and modeling and some voice work. And that is due to the gap between my interests and my talents, and what I really studied then instead was communication design in the 2000s in Düsseldorf. Someone on the list was also from FH Düsseldorf. Is she here? No? Okay. It did work. I am successful as a photographer, so that's okay. But I'm not so great at holding presentations in front of you guys, obviously. I haven't done that often enough. So you've probably already wondered, why isn't a photographer showing anything on a screen? That would have been there. And I didn't think it was that great with the columns in the room and everything. And also, I didn't want to give you a course in photo practice and explain to you what a symmetrical photo looks like. I thought we can talk about the theoretics a little more, even though I hated that when I studied. But maybe it's not as boring today, hopefully. Okay, also, you don't need to take notes the whole time, because I prepared a page of so-called show notes, like literary... I don't know what it's called, list with the things I talk about. So if you want to take a picture of that later, that's on the radiator, then you can just do that. And you have every name on there. Okay, so let's give you an overview of what I'm talking about today. It's going to be symmetry in nature, about scientists and their take on symmetry. Not too much, though. I will briefly go over architecture and the way artists describe symmetry. And then we will end with symmetrical communication. So when I first heard about that theme of February, which is symmetry, I thought, oh my God, this is exactly not what I want to talk about. This is exactly nothing that interests me, what I want to avoid at all costs when working, and I just don't find it interesting. Well then, except I thought, well, it is interesting at times, for example, in nature. For example, if you take an axisymmetrical shape, like a body, which is mirrored in the middle, or another structure like this one, maybe. Or a snowflake that's point symmetrical. A friend of mine said when I told him about not explaining those in detail that I should, because maybe some people don't know what I'm talking about. I prepared this little paper snowflake for you. So now I know how it works again, and I can do it next year in winter. See, it has this point, it's a point symmetrical shape, and if you rotate it around the center, at a sixth at each time, when you work more precisely than me, it's perfectly symmetrical. And we all know that each snowflake is alike, and that's due to the shape of the water molecules when they freeze, but don't want to talk about that. So, about axisymmetrical shapes. I had my son make this little butterfly for me. And so you can see that an axisymmetrical or axisymmetry is very easy, even for children to understand. They don't need to take a mirror to see what it will look like. They can just perceive it right away and create something. Okay, so I have papers. So there's this agreement in dimensions, proportions, and arrangement. That's the official etymology description of the online etymology dictionary. That means everything is symmetrical in unless there is a compelling reason not to be, said Blaise Pascal in the 17th century. He was a French philosopher and mathematician. And I thought, really, this doesn't really sound very logical to me, so let's find out more about that. And also, it's from the 17th century, so maybe he didn't know exactly what was going to happen when scientists work further. So we all know that symmetries flatter our aesthetic sensibility in general, and humans like bilateral symmetry in faces because that makes them look healthy and genetically fit. But then when there is a tendency to excessive symmetry, people perceive that as boring. For example, when I look at you and your hair goes to one side a little bit, it looks great. It would be boring if it were just centered. And yeah, so that makes you interesting. Also, you have one dot left on your right, a black dot, and not on the other one. Yeah. So I look at you more to find out more about you. So, but my friend Nathan, he also came around the corner and said something like that. When he heard that I was giving this lecture here, he said, "Oh, symmetry, isn't that the aesthetics of the fools?" And I had to laugh, but when I Googled that phrase, I found out that very many people have said it in several sorts of sentences, like symmetry is the aesthetics of the stupid and of the little man, like we say in German. And it's assigned as a quote to a wide variety of thinkers and creators, like Mies van der Rohe and Picasso, and nobody knows who really said it. Maybe it was Schopenhauer. So also in architecture, symmetry, primarily in historical architecture, symmetry was often a sign of grandeur and power. If a visitor comes to a religious building or a grand building, they're supposed to be attracted to the center, and so it made sense for everyone to make the building symmetrical. If you watched House of Cards, you probably also noticed how, or if you were in Washington at some point, how the White House and all those buildings are perfectly symmetrical, and also the rooms and the decorations, opposed to here, for example, where there is a couch on the left and a couch on the right, and a fireplace in the middle, and then there's a vase on the left and on the right of it, and in the center there's a stupid clock. And I just find that so boring, because you can totally tell they're just trying to relive the perfect Greek ancient culture where democracy was once founded, and they haven't developed since. So there's also a book about this. It's by Ayn Rand. It's called The Fountainhead. Maybe some of you've read it. You've read it? No. It's a book about an architect who lived in who was born, I think, in the 1920s, and it's in the United States. And he struggling with the American architecture being unable to accept innovation and being restricted in its development, and so they can't develop anything further. And nowadays, modern architecture, relies on the wings and balance of the masses, as you might have noticed lately when you looked out of the window. And I took a taxi last night and talked to the taxi driver because I had this notion that Islamic art also has a lot of symmetry in it. And he told me that it is forbidden to display anything with a soul in art, except photography, which is a new art form. But you can only have things without animals or people in them in your art. So there were a lot of symmetrical patterns in Islamic art. For example, if you look at the roof of a mosque, you will only find point symmetrical or whatever shapes that keep repeating, or calligraphy of their handwriting. So, okay. Also, which is true, is that symmetry is the most prominent of all natural laws. Mathematical symmetry is observed, and I have to read this, is observed with respect to the passing of time. For example, when the Earth moves around the sun and it rotates a little bit differently all the time, that makes us have seasons again and again. So there is a symmetry there. Or in, also still talking about mathematical symmetry, or in spatial relation, like how is one thing opposed to another, something under or over something, and do things keep repeating. And geometric transformations also, like maybe a heart rate curve. So generally, if a natural law is lacking such symmetry, researchers become suspicious that maybe it needs revising and something isn't yet thought out all the way. And I have read a lot of essays and discussions about that, about thinkers writing about scientists and their work. And they have figured out that the common scientist is trying to find a symmetrical world, because mathematics is easy for scientists, and every formula that can be derived makes the universe a little bit more explainable. And they hope that everything is scalable. Like if it works on the small scale, you can also make it work on the big scale. But as we all know from physics lessons in school, things are likely to be abstracted and omitted in order to get simplification. For example, if an object flies or falls, you have to take out air resistance or friction out of that equation in order to make it calculable at all, or to have an easy formula. Otherwise, it might get really complicated. But if you leave out things like that, it might lead to chaos in the long run. Chaos in the sense of the chaos theory. So you might have heard of the butterfly effect that says that small influences in the ecosystem of things can lead to far-reaching changes for the whole world. Yeah, I guess. So I have, for example, when I take a photograph of somebody's face and I go up closely to them, then I sometimes see that one side is a little flatter than the other side. And then I ask them, well, do you sleep on this side? And and usually that's right. People think about it for a while and they're like, oh yeah, I think you're right. But that doesn't happen until you get older, or you just need to sleep on your back or whatever. I think I have one side like that too. So next. I have another quote that's really long. It's from a British art critic and painter, John Ruskin, who lived in the 19th century. He also did a lot of other things. I think he was just a professional in the arts. He said, "No human face is exactly the same in its lines on each side, no leaf perfect in its lobes, no branch in its symmetry. All admit irregularity as they imply change, and to banish imperfection is to destroy expression, to check exertion, to paralyze vitality. And all things are literally better, lovelier, and more beloved for the imperfections." Yay! So, that's what I said about you. So, to have the opposite of symmetry is called variance, and symmetry is the invariance of things. There's also a quote by a German musicologist, Helga de la Motte Haber. She's still alive. I didn't know whether it was a French name or not, but she's actually from Germany. And she said, "Art which wants to say something cannot exhaust itself in symmetry and balance." And that's true if you think about it. Musical patterns need to change to make music interesting. Otherwise, you just have techno music. Or poetry. Sorry. I hope there's no one here from techno. But if there is, then tell me the difference. Okay. Also, poetry, of course, it can't be all the same again and again. It will be so boring. And photographs, too. I just don't want to see a photograph of a river flowing, and there's a bridge in the middle, and some trees on the right and the left side. So we need to apply that to all arts. But still, we need to think that symmetry is somewhat a required base for us to allow free thinking. It's okay to have. Every chair and table is somewhat symmetrical so that they don't distract us all the time, and we're able to focus on our own mind's work. I always say world. But so a little bit of symmetry isn't so bad. We just need to admit that some balance in that symmetry and asymmetry is necessary for us to become creative at all. And that's also true for communication. Paul Watzlawick, a scientist I learned about in my studies but forgot about him, so I Googled it again. He was from Austria and moved to the United States. He died around 10 years ago, and he was a psychotherapist there, but also a communication scientist. And he proposed a model of communication theory that is still being used today. It had 5 axioms, and the last one of them being interpersonal communication flows are either symmetric or complementary, depending on whether the relationship between the partners is based on balance or difference. So that means difference is often expressed in subordination, meaning one person has the upper hand over the other one, like a mother-daughter situation or student-teacher situation. And symmetrical interchange, on the other hand, is characterized by partners striving to minimize inequalities, and they are striving for equality. And this is also done in public relation today. Companies are trying to be our friends, and the hotline staff expresses worry with our trouble with that product. So we feel more understood and on eye level with them. One partner doesn't force the other one into that position, but they are in a reciprocal relationship, meaning that they complement each other that way. So the behavior of one of them requires the behavior of the other one and vice versa. So when a client, I don't care how big the company is or how insecure the one person in front of the camera is, comes and I take a picture of them, I turn myself into reflective behavior. That means I still say what I think, but I individually engage with them to make the person feel more comfortable. As a negative example, like, for example, I just said that I sometimes do modeling. When I'm booked by my modeling agency to go to a big photographer's set to work there, and they don't know that I'm also a photographer, so I'm just a model there, I realize oftentimes that the mood on set isn't very good. People are under pressure. They don't really like each other. They talk about each other behind their backs. And the models are just there's like a hierarchy. The models are just being used as tools. I'm saying used because they are. You don't count as a person. For example, one time I had to wear shoes that were way too small. I could not stand in them at all, but I was only shown up to here. Like, it was totally unnecessary to wear those shoes, but they wouldn't just let me be comfortable, so I had to be there and feel bad, and everything felt really bad. Also, the people on set were in a bad mood. I just don't want that happening. I want everybody to be cool with one another when we work together. Also, with the client, I talk to them like I would talk with a makeup artist or so that we all feel like a group, or like you said, a family, where everyone has the same individuality and has the same thing to contribute and it has the same value. So because we all know this photo wouldn't be there without the model, or without, I don't know, the client who has the money. We all need them. Yeah. So that for me was an example for asymmetrical relationships that is based on inequalities. So when I take a picture of somebody, one person, for example, if I sit them down at a table to make it look like an interview situation or so, I sit with them for a while and I put the camera aside and we just talk about something maybe unrelated to the photo, so that I can get to see their angles a little better and see how they react. And when we talk in a lower voice, it's not such a scary situation for the person anymore. Or if someone is in front of a backdrop and I have this giant lamp that just blinds them, they never feel comfortable. And I know that because I sometimes go on the other side. It just doesn't feel good, even though I know exactly that I'm going to have the photos later. But they know I have the photos later, and I can blow the face up to the size of a house and see every pimple and everything. So it's important for me to go up there and maybe like pick a hair from their collar and talk to them in a lower voice, so that they can establish a little bit of trust with me and I with them. And for me, it's easier to take a good picture then, and take a picture that actually arises at eye level, because the camera is my tool to freeze that moment of my perception with the person and my composition and my favorite background and my favorite lighting. And in the end, we're hopefully then both happy that we've achieved or created something new at that task of taking a good picture by adapting ourselves and our personalities a little bit. And so we've developed a little bit further for ourselves. And then that shows me that it is an importance of transferring a learning like the principle of symmetry to the relationship between people, as in striving for a symmetrical interpersonal communication flow. So it becomes interesting when you yourself apply that principle to other areas of your life as well. I'm already done. Yeah. And fast. Ja.
Any questions?
Bitte.
English, I guess.
Kannst du machen, wie du lustig bist.
So when you were talking about symmetrics in interaction between people, it made me think of a I think it's standard practice in improvisational theater, where you set up a situation where one person is in power and the other one is very much not in power. And that's obviously the opposite of...
That would be asymmetrical. Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you think about that, once you realize that, you see it a lot in like television or films or not. And it's actually a lot more fun to watch, a lot more interesting than the eye-to-eye, symmetrical relationship.
But you mean in staged situations?
Exactly. So that makes me think. Do you feel there's a difference between, let's say, real life and artificial symmetry? As in, because I know what you mean, right? If you take a picture or make a layout or do whatever artistic or aesthetic thing, I find it more interesting too if it's asymmetrical.
Yeah. Okay.
But in real life, I don't want to be the asshole who does this power play.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, but I watched something similar like that. Someone I know well called me, and she told me that her father is being mean to her or something like that. And then I know how the person is. The person as well isn't very nice sometimes when she gets aggravated. So I told her, oh, maybe you depend on each other. Maybe you make it happen that way. And it felt uncomfortable. I don't know. I would have liked it better if they got along. So if this other person would have realized, the person I talked with, that her father isn't the mean one, but she's also not being that nice at that moment, then it would flow smoother. And I don't want to watch people fight. I don't know. That's kind of what you asked, right?
Well, no. I think what I was saying is, my observation is that I don't want to watch people fight in real life.
Yeah.
It's a lot more fun to watch.
Yeah, of course.
People fight in artificial situations like movies.
Right, but you also want to see like an adventure where someone almost dies, but you don't want to see that in real life either.
So,
this is why we have new movies.
Yeah,
so you get to feel those situations like you were there, and you have those emotions maybe, but it's not real.
They're a lot stronger.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a difference between symmetry in real life
Right.
and artificial or aesthetic productions or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when I was talking about being symmetrical in my relationships with people, I also meant in real life. Then in the photo, you can't see that.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. More questions? Yeah.
You were talking about the situation with the photographs where the photographs have using you as a model in a not pleasant way. Have you used it in the future for your offers as a photographer? Like that is important for you as a photographer to treat also the portraiting way person in the good way, and to talk to the person in the low voice, and to get the right communication.
Right. Yeah. I often become friends with models I take photos of. For example, Nadja.
Right? So we have a good example here.
I saw her on Facebook somewhere, and I said, let's work together. And then we kind of became friends. Now we just write to one another sometimes. Yeah, for me, being a model at a photo shoot of someone else's, or at a commercial advertising thing, whatever, it feels to me like I'm doing an internship sometimes. Like, there is always this point where I say, oh, remember the light isn't really hitting me here? And they're like, how can you know that? Like, oh, sorry, I'm also a photographer. And then they think that I work at a passport studio, like. And it's very important for me to see how that is. And those first times made me realize, oh God, I don't want that. It's not natural for me to be like that, to be mean to someone. And sometimes there's this well-known photographer here in Cologne. He's shot me several times and my sons and everything. And when I see him at a casting or in the street, he doesn't know who I am, even though we've been close to one another so many times. And I'm this big on his website. Like, how can he not recognize me? Or maybe it's just his way of not taking a personal relationship with this object that he took a photo of. Yeah. But that also probably happens if someone else retouches your pictures and someone else does the communication. I often call myself, if I want to work with Nadja, for example, and I retouch the photos myself. But that's only because I know if I tell someone I want it to be retouched like this, I'm going to have to redo it anyway, because maybe I didn't say it right, or maybe the other person doesn't live up to my standards there. But yeah, sometimes an assistant does the calling, but we always know who that is. And I like to propose to clients too that I work with the people that I know already, because that's always good when I know how they work, how they are, how they look from different angles. Yeah.
So last question. Yeah.
Not so much a question, but you're just making me think. And what you were saying, and then also the concept of symmetry and communication is like you're also meant to talking about science and thinking about the whole like equilibrium thing. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the symmetry and communication to me is more like sounds kind of more like not symmetry in roles or status, but like if one person is being superior, they're inviting a subordinate response.
Right.
And so then actually to make it asymmetrical, you have to challenge that by giving the opposite of what they're asking you for. Somebody talks to you like a child, you're probably going to either respond like a child in a very passive way or even in a rebellious way. So it's like, for me, is that also not some kind of weird symmetry?
Yeah, that's the way how they say the people or the roles complement one another. But I think you just said it the other way around. Symmetrical communication is when they are on eye level, and asymmetrical is. But you mean that they balance each other out? Yeah.
It's weird. Like when I think of, if I would think of symmetry, I would immediately think of balance. But then again, it's completely asymmetrical is another kind of strange balance.
Somewhere I read, like when I Googled everything, I read this. It's all a Wikipedia script. I found that there was someone writing an article about balance and symmetry not to be confused at all. I didn't read it because I was like, whatever, too much information. But then I thought about it again yesterday because I talked with my physiotherapist and he said, no, spine is symmetrical. And it doesn't matter, it's not supposed to be symmetrical. And I kept saying, but isn't it trying to be symmetrical? If you mix them all together, isn't there a perfectly symmetrical spine coming out? Like, no, it's going to be like this. Like, oh, I think you're mixing up median and average or something like that. But he's like, no, it's not supposed to be symmetrical. Your body balances everything out. Like, for example, maybe my right shoulder is stronger if my spine isn't as strong there. Or I have more muscles on the other side if the spine is a little weaker on one side. And this is also a balance, right? You're still balanced, kind of straight, and you might not have back problems at all. But then it's not symmetrical. So there's a difference between balance and symmetry. So maybe you're also talking about dependence and balance. Yeah. So in the end, it kind of straightens one another out if you take an average.
So I don't want to interrupt or stop this conversation, but I think lots of people need to work it. So I hope you could feel the symmetry vibe in our community, and I hope I see next time the same symmetry balance.
Oh God, these Beispiele.
No, yeah. We have lots of coffee left from Highland and Gaffelbrause. See you next time on March 22nd with Anna Jona von Wildling Shoes. So have an amazing weekend, and I hope nobody needs to work, but maybe somebody. So, so yeah, that's it.
I'm here for more questions, so if you want to ask questions, yeah. I live here now.